Hey folks, Pixel Pedant here once again, and I've got something I think is pretty cool to show you today. And that is the final version of the game that's been my big summer project, in which I try to squeeze way more than makes any sense into a 16K Ti basic cassette game. Or 12K really, since 12K is how much memory BASIC really has to work with in the 16K of VDP on the TI-99. In a way, this is a follow-up, since I did do a video early on in this project about what I think has to go into making a TI basic cassette game not suck, and there I talked about why that can be so hard, and what I was doing to get the most out of the weird way TI basic works. Most of those ideas weren't really new ones, since there were a few programmers who took the time to really master TI basic in the 80s. And their work has become a major interest of mine over the past few years, as you've probably seen on this channel. So, even before I got underway with Hell's Halls, I had plenty of time to think about building on those ideas and taking them further. But God knows, I didn't climb that mountain as a kid back in the day. I am just as guilty as anybody of giving up on the TI Basic and ROM on the TI-99 and writing it off as kind of a lost cause and maybe a cruel joke on the average TI owner. Heck, the packaging for Hell's Halls calls the game a love letter to all the TI Basic games I didn't write back in the day. So I really am making up for lost opportunities here, because I sure wasn't any kind of TI Basic wunderkind back then. In the present, though, Hell's Halls is my way of saying I was wrong, and so was most of everybody else. Because you can do some pretty cool stuff in TI Basic, with just a program recorder and a console. So, now you get to look at what's become of my big TI Basic Prove It project, and decide whether folks did give up too early on TI Basic back in the day, and whether we could have done more with it if we put the work into exploiting what was a pretty fantastic graphics and sound feature set for its time. A TI-99 and program recorder were my first computer setup, of course. So, trying to make Hell's Halls a great cassette game for an unexpanded TI-99 like that does really mean a lot to me. The non-basic inspirations here are mainly Hunt the Wumpus and Tunnels of Doom. But I try to take things in a direction a bit different from both of those. One which works better with what TI Basic can do, and works around what it can't. And in the end, I'm pretty happy with the software that came out of that exercise. Enough so that after I put a 4-month effort into making the software look good, and play about as well as a TI Basic game can, I decided I wanted to take the cassette and the case and the package and make those look just as good. So, Hell's Halls has gotten a pretty slick physical release if I do say so myself. 'Cause if I want to show TI Basic games are worth taking seriously, well, I figure I need a game that looks like it's worth taking seriously, whether it's on the screen or on the shelf. The physical game is something I'm releasing in smallish numbers. First of all, because cassette supply and production is tricky these days, and second, because every single one of these is recorded and tested by me on a real iron TI-99 and program recorder, which is pretty time-consuming. But while that's kinda arduous, I kinda like it that way. Given that showing you can make an interesting game with good sound and good graphics for its era, using nothing but a TI-99 and program recorder, is literally the whole point of this exercise. In any case, the packages are available in my store at least until stock runs out, so you can check the description for that link if you're interested in those. Though you don't need to buy the game to play it if you don't wanna, because I have released the main game on side A of the cassette as a WAV file for free, and that's linked in the description. That's come a long, long way from the early prototype I'd shared with a previous video, so if you poked around at that, it's surely worth giving this one a try. In the main quest in that file and on side A of the cassette, there are 4 floors, and you race against the clock to get to the final exit before time runs out, and you're trapped there forever. So that version of the game is mostly about efficiency and survival, and the Dungeon Master makes sure you know time is your enemy. Making the game, though, I was always going back and forth on how randomized I wanted its content to be. So, just to have my cake and eat it too, I decided to use the second quest on side B of the cassette to try a spin on the game that made things more varied. There, the text and graphics and palettes are more randomized, and the dungeon levels aren't fixed or finite. So you can keep on going deeper until you win or you die, with the palettes including a bunch of colors that got cut from the main quest as well. So the second quest is just me dipping my toe in the waters of chaos, I suppose, introducing randomized aesthetics and flavor text along with endless dungeon generation, to see how workable all of that is. Keeping in mind, any text in the game eats into that 12K of basic that fits into VDP at a breakneck pace. So, having a genuinely huge amount of varied text is never really going to be a thing in a game like this. Text-heavy as Hell's Halls is, that only goes so far. Still, it'd be fun to see whether something more varied could be done for a sequel someday, which, in the tradition of the classic TI-99 RPG Legends 2, the sequel, would I guess have to be titled Hell's Halls 2. The sequel. Seriously though, I need a bit of a break from big coding projects, because this was a big one, and it's nice to finally come up for air. There was just a whole lot that needed to be developed for this one, given you can't develop a pure TI basic cassette game like this in a by-the-book way, because by-the-book basic mostly just won't let you. So on that subject, let's talk about what went into making Hell's Halls the way it is. One big thing that made Hell's Halls possible in the end was a sort of bytecode I used for most of its sound and graphics commands, where all the main subprograms use data encoded into strings like this one, by reading in the string, then popping values off the top one by one until the subprogram either runs out of values, or runs into a token that tells it to transfer control to a different subprogram. That keeps the program data really nice and compact, and lets different data types be packed in together in the same string. So that's something I would absolutely use again if I developed another big TI basic program down the line. And I'm sure I'd use those tools even better, on account of having the mature version of them right from the start. Which is a chicken and egg dilemma I know isn't unique to this software project, but certainly is relevant to it. Without the sound and graphics assets, I never would have had a basis for creating the tools. But without the tools, there's no way to create sound and graphics that make the best possible use of them. Which is to say, it's kind of a catch-22. Still, the way the program packs its data works out pretty well, and it lets me do things like create those level intro screens without using too much memory in the process. So, even if they could have done even more, those tools were nice to have. Probably my favorite thing about packing data into tokenized strings in this way is it lets me interleave data in a way that lets sound be played while graphics are being drawn. That would be insanely memory intensive if you did that in a by-the-book way, as a dozen different call sound commands, and a dozen different call hchar and call vchar commands, and a couple call color commands thrown in there too. But here, most commands are just 2 to 4 bytes. The big exception to that is any text that needs to be drawn to screen, which naturally tends to be as many bytes as the text is letters. But it could be a lot worse, given what TI Basic gives you to write characters with. Your only TI Basic tools for writing characters to arbitrary screen locations being call hchar and call vchar, which write one character one or more times, either vertically or horizontally. So if you want to write some text to screen, you need to segment the string, convert each character to an ASCII value, then calculate the screen location for each of them one character at a time. This all makes using a lot of text in a TI Basic game kind of questionable. But after all, this project is more or less me listing off all the things I've ever said you can't really do in a TI Basic game, then doing those things as much as possible. So here we are. And anyway, writing text one character at a time does actually have one big advantage for me here. And that is, it allows that data to be fully integrated in my bytecode, which needs character values unpacked one at a time in case the next one's some kind of token. There is just one big hitch to this plan to encode everything to bytes placed in data statements, though. And that is, TI Basic can't type bytes. It can type printable ASCII characters from 32 to 126. And, what's worse, quite a lot of my data consists of values below 32. For screen positions, colors, and all that. So the solution is, any data types using values below 32 got 64 added to them so that A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, and so on. Making the data not just typable, but pretty readable too. And yeah, with modern tools or expansion hardware, I could have easily just hacked unprintable characters into my TI Basic program. But I want a program any kid could have written on an unexpanded TI-99 in TI Basic itself. So, no cheats here. Here, call color is one command that always deals with data based on that offset of 64, where pattern group 1 is set to black on black by writing ABB. Usually after the call color token, of course, a left curly bracket. And so, that's how my program says call color 122. The difference being, a line reading call color 122 would cost me 27 bytes, whereas throwing curly bracket ABB into a data statement costs 4. And it's almost readable data once you're used to it. So all this storing numeric values in bytes is great from a memory economy standpoint. But on the other hand, it's really, really costly as far as time efficiency goes, since TI Basic is very slow at segmenting strings. The upshot being, you can't really use any of this data while accepting or resolving input. There, you kinda need to play to TI Basic strengths and exploit the things it can do fast. So, yes, Hell's Halls uses string data for dialogue or music during pauses in gameplay, but inside combat or when moving around the dungeon, the program is mainly an intricate web of conditionals, go-tos, go-subs, and abuses of floating point math. Now, like I said in my last video, all TI Basic numeric values are 8-byte floats. So, it's not even a question of whether you're using a floating point value. You are, whether you like it or not. But the good news is, there are some wacky ways that can be used to your advantage. And in Hell's Halls, the most important one comes into play in the most important part of a game's code. The part dealing with the tile you're on, the tile you're moving to, and what should happen as a result, every single time you move or you try to. You might be walking on a normal floor tile, or toward a door, or a wall, or a trap, or a whole pile of other possibilities. And the game needs to decide what to do based on the character values of those tiles. So the naive by-the-book way to go about this would be to string together a huge pile of if statements. And in Hall's case, that'd look something like this. The biggest upside to this approach being, because you can order them however you need, you can prioritize them accordingly, so the checks you want to be the speediest can just go first. But the alternative to that is an on-go-to, and this way of dealing with complex control flow has the advantage in absolutely every other area. It scales better for one thing. With an on-go-to passing control to the 10th of 10 possibilities, only slightly slower than a single if can do a single comparison with a single result. And with an on-go-to usually offering better memory economy too. So most of the time there's just no competition. You want to use an on-go-to or go-sub if at all possible. You just have to work around the fact that an on-go-to needs its input values to be sequential values starting at 1. And here, we're dealing with tile numbers starting at 33 and going up to 159. So that's a bit of a problem. The normal floor tile is tile 104, the arm trap tile is tile 126, the door tiles are 46 and 47, very much not 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. But thanks to the lunacy of TI Basic and its speedy floating point arithmetic, turning those into something close enough to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on is actually pretty quick. The trick here is the value doesn't need to equal 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or what have you. There are no real integers here, and TI Basic's idea of a 2 in a command like this is just a number closer to 2 than to 1 or 3. To an on-go-to, 2.4 and 1.73 are the same thing. So thanks to that, we can just do some arithmetic and turn these values into a value close to 1, and a value close to 2, and a value close to 4, and so on. And that's good enough for the purposes of an on-go-to. And this works anywhere TI Basic commands deal with arguments that logically are treated as integers. So this is a handy strategy just about everywhere you look. Messy because you have to keep in mind that the value you're treating a variable as if it were for the purpose of one command, and the value it actually contains can be quite different, but very handy nonetheless. Another example of this coming in handy in Hall's is in the case of direction key input handling during combat. The direction keys have return values of 0, 2, 3, and 5, which is annoyingly close to 1, 2, 3, and 4 without actually being helpful in the way those would be. But take the return values, add 1, and divide by 1.5, and you've got values you can treat as 1, 2, 3, and 4 for selecting array values or doing on-go-tos or anything else you need them for. And as I say, there's no reason to shy away from floating point math like this in TI Basic, because in TI Basic, everything's a float anyway. And dividing a variable x that equals 2.87234 by a variable y that equals 1.65342 takes only very slightly longer than dividing a 1 by a 1. Anyway, useful as all that is in handling input and control flow, another place TI Basic's floating point performance is really, really useful is in the game's music subroutine. Reason being, the game's music is where it really goes to town, deriving complex outcomes from tiny amounts of source data. There, any musical phrase or song starts with an instrument byte, and then contains one or more bytes encoding frequency data, with the instrument value being used to calculate attack, decay, and sustain for every note, and the relative loudness of periodic noise and tone generator tones through each attack, decay, and sustain step. So there's a lot going on there, and I need a spreadsheet to keep track of all of it myself, and remember which instruments have which attenuation patterns and durations. In the end, though, the routine does a lot with that one instrument byte. But that's just attenuation, and pitch gets encoded separately. So I still need a way to represent musical frequencies like 138.6 Hz and 220 Hz and 349.2 Hz as, well, a sequence of ASCII characters like A and B and C. And here's the problem with that. Musical frequencies don't increase linearly. They increase exponentially. And it just so happens that TI Basic is rather slow when it comes to exponentiation. So, while there is a formula for calculating the value of a note, say 4 semitones higher than any other given note on the chromatic scale, performance considerations don't allow it here. And I need something else that works in TI Basic. So what worked for me, sort of, was this formula, which is an ugly hack for producing frequencies in the range I need at an exponential rate of increase, roughly similar to the chromatic scale, using ASCII character values as input. And if you feel like pointing out that I've just replaced one kind of exponentiation with another by writing it as multiplication, yep. But in TI Basic, a times a times a is way faster than a to the power of 3. So that is in fact an important difference. Regardless, making the game sound and music a lot more interesting than any you'd normally expect to hear in a TI Basic game was always a major goal for the game. And in the end, I think it manages that fairly well. A 16K Ti Basic cassette game is never going to be as speedy and responsive as a game developed in TI Logo or Forth or Pascal or Assembly. But then, none of those can run on an unexpanded TI-99 with nothing but a program recorder. So in the end, I'm happy with what Hell's Halls manages to do, since I think it makes a pretty strong case that you can manage some rather good sound and graphics on a TI-99 with no upgrades at all, with nothing but a cassette deck and console. And I hope seeing a fancy-looking new TI Basic cassette game in the year 2022 can be a bit of a reminder that the cassette really is one of the system's classic software formats, and one we don't have to leave in the dustbin of TI-99 history. One which anyone can still develop for today. Anyway, thanks for watching as always, folks. And if you're interested in visiting Hell's Halls or getting yourself a physical copy, those links are in the description. Sorry I took so long getting this video out to you, but this project had me completely buried in code and cassette supplies for the last while. This is Pixel Pedant signing off.